Hello everybody and welcome to this talk today. My name is Helen Davis and I'm a chartered sports psychologist at Think.Believe.Perform, which is a sports psychology consultancy based here in Cambridge. It's really nice to be talking to you today and thanks for listening in. I hope that you will find this talk interesting and informative and that it will give you some things to go away and have a think about. So my talk today is called Maintaining Motivation in Lockdown. Something that I've been talking to athletes quite a lot about recently. But I thought before I get going on that, I'd just tell you a little bit about me and the job that I do so that you know who's going to be talking to you today. So as I said, I'm a chartered sports psychologist and I work with a wide variety of athletes from many different sports. I've put a few up there on the slide for you to have a look at so you can see the range of sports that I work with. And I work with recreational athletes through to kind of Olympic, Paralympic athletes and world champions. And I'm very fortunate to find out and discover what athletes go through when they go into the performance arena. I absolutely love my job. I'm very enthusiastic about sports psychology and I hope that that comes across in my talk today. So let's get going on the talk then. Maintaining motivation during lockdown. Well, you can see on the slide I've kind of given you a list of the things that I'm going to cover in this talk. First of all, I'd like to just talk about the time that we're going through in general at the moment. And then I want to talk to you about the 3 C's of motivation. They're called 3 C's because I'm hoping that it's memorable to you, that you will remember the 3 things because they're really useful tools to know about motivation. Then I'm going to move on to how to use goals to maintain motivation and set effective goals, particularly during this time. And then I want to move on and talk about control and having a focus on control and how that might be beneficial to you. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about using your strengths to help maintain motivation. So I'm hoping that this kind of thread of this talk today is going to get you thinking. That's my aim, is that you will start thinking about you'll start thinking about your motivation and what are your drivers? What are the things that make you tick? What are the things that get you out of bed to do the things that you do in the morning? The more you learn about your motivation, and by that I mean your motivation, because we're all different, we all have different ways of viewing motivation and our drives. The more you learn about it, the more you can get better at it and tap into things when you know that you need to if you're finding you're not so motivated. So that's what the talk's going to be about today, so let's get going. So I wanted to talk to you about this period of lockdown that we've been in, and I think it's important to start here because we have experienced what psychologists are calling a non-normative transition. So by that, it means that it was something that came upon us very quickly, it was very unexpected, and it's something that we weren't prepared for. Now, as a consequence of that, it means that it's harder for us to adapt to, more difficult for us to manage, and there's been an awful lot of uncertainty. There's been an awful lot of questions that we have been asking of ourselves, of our lives, of the government during this time. And therefore this kind of non-normative transition that we have gone through has an inevitable consequence of big changes. And one of those that I think has taken quite a big hit for people is motivation. It was one of the sort of first things that once we entered lockdown, the athletes came to me with and said, you know, I'm worried about my motivation. You know, the goal that I had this year has disappeared. It's gone. I don't know if I'm going to be competing even this year. And there was so much uncertainty and so many different questions. And I think one of the first things that athletes in particular were really concerned about was, am I going to be motivated because I don't have this goal anymore? So I think recognising at the start that the effect on lockdown, on our training, on our competing, on our long-term goals, that effect, that big effect, has been inevitable. And it's very difficult for us to just kind of make sense of that in the beginning. So I kind of wanted to use this as a starting point because what we have been through is not normal and what we have been through is very difficult. So therefore, you've probably found that it has affected your motivation in many different ways. Now, if we were in normal circumstances, motivation fluctuates anyway. I mean, it's very normal for even Olympic athletes and world championships to have dips and troughs in their motivation. It's very much a fluctuating phenomenon anyway. So during this time, of course, we've had all this uncertainty around us, all the everything that's been going on. Therefore, motivation is bound to be affected, and it's a concern for athletes moving forward with their training. We're now kind of in a period where we're potentially having a non-normative return to sport, because as I'm sure you can see, national governing bodies are now producing documents about how to go back to the sport and how that's going to look, and it's actually going to look very different again. So I think motivation is going to be different then, because we're going back to something that potentially is not the same either. So a recognition of this has been a really hard time. This is a difficult time and can be harder to manage than usual, I think is a good starting point when you start thinking about your motivation. So there's a question for you. How has your motivation been during this period of time? Have you found that you've been really lacking in motivation because you've lost your goals? Or were you one of these people that kind of went into overdrive at the start of lockdown and thought, I want to keep fit, I want to keep doing all the things that I'm doing? Have you been somewhere in between? And that's what motivation is. It's on a continuum, and we can find ourselves at different places at different times. So now I want to move on to the 3 C's of motivation. So these 3 C's, remember, if I said to you, are easy to remember, hopefully. These are key ingredients to motivation. So people's motivation tends to be at its best when you feel like you have control over your motivation. Now, in order to have control over your motivation, it means to reflect on your motivation, what drives you, and know about what I call like your motivation personality can be really, really useful. And if you can stay focused on these ingredients, the 3 things, the 3 C's that I'm going to tell you about, if you're feeling that you're not particularly motivated at a certain time in your life, if you look at these 3 things, you can look and say, well, is that not working for me at the moment? Do I need to put more time and energy into that one? And then my motivation might change. So the first ingredient of motivation is competence. Now, competence is when you feel like you're getting good feedback, that you feel like you're being recognised and respected for what you do. You feel like you're doing well, you're noticing progress, you feel like there's an improvement in whatever it is that you've chosen to do. So competence and having high competence is a good ingredient for motivation. We're looking at quality of motivation here. These 3 key ingredients that I'm telling you about, these 3 C's, when all 3 of them are working, you tend to have a highly motivated individual. So that first one there is competence. So think about you. How competent are you feeling at the moment? So the second key ingredient is connectedness. That's the second C. So connectedness is that feeling of being part of a quest to achieve something that maybe you couldn't do alone. That you have a sense of belonging to a group or a team or a community where you relate to other people and you have that affiliation and sense of belonging. So that's the second C, the second key ingredient to motivation. Now the third one is a sense of autonomy, a sense of control. So that third C stands for control. So when you have really high quality motivation, you have a sense of free will, you have a sense of freedom and choice over what you decide to do. So you have an intrinsic engagement in activity, you're doing it on your own terms. That's control, the third C. So have a think about those 3 C's and think about you and think about your motivation. So competence, control, connectedness. Think about which 3 of those maybe are the most important to you. Maybe which one is the least important to you. They're all good questions to ask yourself about you and what your motivation is like. I think it's also worth thinking about the period of time that we're now in and how challenging those 3 things could be during lockdown. So competence, for example, there are some sports where people have not been able to participate in their sport. Therefore, you can see that level of competence might drop. Having a sense of control, well, that's a difficult one too, right? There's a lot of things that are outside of our control in a situation that we have found ourselves in. So feeling that sense of having choice may have been taken away from us. Now, being connected, well, we have social media, we have Zoom, everybody's into Zoom, aren't they? Skype and all of those things. But is that connectedness the same connectedness that you get when you actually see people? And do you feel that that connectedness has been compromised? So again, all good questions to ask yourself, all good questions in terms of reflecting on you and your motivation. So in order to keep our motivation the best quality that we possibly can, we want to focus on these 3 C's and really engage with them and think about whether they're working or not for us. So we want to fuel them. So I'm going to give you 3 different activities that you can see there on the slide for each of the 3 C's, which is something that you can do to enable you to reflect on each C and think about whether it's working for you at the moment. So that if it is, you can continue to work on it and recognise what it is that's keeping you in that good quality place of motivation. Or you can look at it and say, actually, this isn't working for me at the moment, and maybe this is a place of focus that would be useful for me. So with competence, we're going to look at goals, which is the goal setting that I talked about earlier. With control, there's an activity called Circle of Influence that we're going to look at. And with connectedness, it's about keeping in touch. And I'm going to give you a few activities, and there's going to be some slides with some information on that there for you. So hopefully those activities you will find useful. You could maybe do them and as I'm talking you through them, or you can go back and do them at a later date. Either way, I hope that you do engage with them, because I really think looking at these 3's is they're key ingredients for motivation. And you're listening to this talk because you're interested in it. You're listening to this talk because there was something about it that made you think, I think maybe I could look at my motivation and maybe that might help me. So if you can engage in the activities, I hope that you will find them really useful. So let's get going with them. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how to fuel the key ingredients of competence. And goal setting is a really good activity to do here. Now, you may find or may have found that many of you began the year very focused on your goals. You knew exactly what it is that you wanted to achieve this year, and you've been working, some people, for years of commitment and dedication to try and fulfill your goal. And this was going to be the year that you were going to do it. And actually, because of the situation that we now find ourselves in, that maybe those goals have gone for you, they have disappeared, or they've been altered significantly in some way. And maybe that goal is no longer such a daily presence for you, that driving force is not there and present in the way that it was. And for some, that goal may be not sustainable this year at all now because of the circumstances. So I'm sure that you've probably read some things about trying to think about new goals. I think for the athletes that I've certainly worked with, there's certainly been a period of loss for people in terms of not being able to try and fulfill that goal this year. So in that circumstance, it's very hard then to think about new goals. But we've now been going through lockdown for, a period of time, and trying to reset those goals or give yourselves new goals to help fuel your competence is going to be a key thing that you can do to benefit your motivation. Now, what you can see there on the screen is kind of a blank goal setting worksheet that I normally use with athletes, and you can see the outcome goal sits there at the top. Now, for many, that outcome goal may not have changed. It may just be postponed, but there's now a much longer period of time. So the outcome goal possibly might still stay the same, or maybe you've decided on a different one. The next level are performance goals. Now again, it may be very difficult for you to do performance goals at this period of time, but performance goals are markers, key markers that tell you, are you on track towards your outcome goal? So that might be a certain time or a distance or something like that. Now, the foundation layer that sits at the bottom are what are called progress goals, and that's really what I want to focus on, particularly during this time, because that can be really beneficial for fueling your competence at this time. So I'm just going to move the slide on to the next goal setting that you can see has actually got some examples in, and I thought I would show this to you as an example of an athlete that I've been working with and the goals that he's been setting for himself. Now you can see from the outcome goal, it's still the same, but his outcome goal has been postponed, but he's still wanting to achieve an Olympic medal next year. But his focus is very much looking at progress goals at the moment because that outcome goal is a long period of time away. Now, progress goals are really important because they're those small steps. They're the small details that you are in control of that you can do on a day-to-day basis. That outcome goal is not in your control. Yes, it's exciting and yes, it's something that motivates you, but it's not directly in your control, whereas progress goals are. Now, particularly during this time, the more that you focus on progress goals, those little steps, all of those key things that collectively can add up together to help you achieve that outcome goal, the more likely you are to feel a sense of competence. So you can see there some of his examples are things like nutrition and strength and conditioning and numbers of times he'll be training in a week, working on some psychology, working on all those little areas that accumulatively will hopefully help him achieve his goal. So I thought I'd give you an example of that so that you can have a go at doing that yourself. But what I'm really wanting you to do is place your focus on the foundation, on the progress goals, and see it as, how can I achieve these things to give me that sense of progress, to give me that sense of improvement, to help move me forwards with a sense of competence. Now, just a few things to say about goals and how to make them effective when you're setting them is, even by writing them down, you're more likely to achieve them. So, have a go at using that slide that I gave you, the blank one. Have a go at putting some progress goals in. Just by writing them in, you're more likely to do them. Print it off, put it up somewhere so that you can see it. I always encourage athletes to do that. It's a visual daily reminder. And again, that can help with your motivation if you can see it. Also, think about goals maybe that are outside performance during this time. Well-being, self-improvement, achievement goals, things which maybe are not just necessarily focused on your sport. I always encourage people to have psychological goals as well, so it may be that you choose to do something like that. Writing a reflective diary during this time can be particularly useful. It can help alleviate worries and concerns just by writing something down. It can be useful to look back over, but also in terms of trying to achieve your goals, if you have a record of that, it provides a really good resource when maybe you do go back into the performance competitive arena to see what you have done, that you will have accrued a bank of evidence, if you like, of all the physical, technical, fitness goals that you have worked on, and that can give a real sense of achievement. Redefining those mastery goals might be an important thing for you to do during this time. Think about what they might be. Again, always to try and fuel your competence so that you're feeling like you are improving. Now, using the 5R cycle are some questions, some good questions that you can ask yourself to help reflect on this. So just have a look at the slide there and look at what those 5 R's are. Ask yourself those questions. Can you give answers to them? It allows you to think about them, and maybe that's a good starting point before you get into actually setting the goals. So good luck with that. I hope that the goal setting can work for you and will help you fuel competence. That's what that one is for. And we're now going to move on to the next C. Okay, we're now going to look at the second C, which is going to be control. Now, control is an interesting one. You've probably heard about it in terms of psychology, particularly in sport, about people focusing on things that they can control and things that they can't control. It's a really good question to ask yourself during this time because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are surrounded, particularly at the moment, with a huge amount of uncertainty. And it can become very easy to focus on that uncertainty. So ask yourself the question, am I predominantly focusing and looking into things that I can control, or maybe am I putting some time and energy into factors that I can't control? So this activity is to get you thinking about that and helping you identify the things that you really can control, the things that you can't control, and the things that maybe are worrying you, and the things that maybe you could have an influence over. So you can see by the slide there that there are 3 different circles. circle of control, circle of influence, and circle of concern. So I'm wanting to take you through this activity where if you can get yourselves a pen and paper and have a go at doing this at the same time, that would be great. And we're going to start off by thinking about the circle of concern. So I'm going to give you some examples or show you some examples of things that athletes have talked to me about during this period of time about what their concerns are. So the circle of concern are those worries, anxieties that you might have about your sport, your training, the competition or lack of competition at the moment, or maybe your motivation. So you can see by some of the examples in there that those are some of the things that people have come up and told me about that sit within that circle of concern. And a lot of those things you'll notice are possibly outside of your control. All right, they're things which you can be worried about, but you haven't any control over, like there's no racing going on. I'm not being able to work in the way that I can at the moment because I've been furloughed. And I am sure that everybody, particularly at the moment, has got a lot of things that have come up in this situation that worries them. So put them all down, write them in that circle. As I said earlier, sometimes just writing these things down can make you feel better just by the process of doing that. So put those into your circle of concern. And now I want to move on to the next circle, which is your circle of control. Now, these are the things which you do have direct control over, the things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. You can see by some of the examples that people gave me in there. When you look at the concerns and then you look at the things that are in the control, yes, you might catch COVID-19. That was an example, I think, in the circle of concern. But the control that you can have over that is washing your hands regularly. So do you see, I'm kind of looking at the circle of concern and then coming up with things that actually relate to it, but that are within my control. Well, the effort that I put into sessions is in my control. It may be that the session is different, but whether I put in 100% effort or 60% effort is within my control. So write as many things in there that you can, that you do have direct control over, that are pertinent to you, and fill that circle with as many things as you can. Now the third circle is the circle of influence. So this is where you don't necessarily have direct control over it, but it may be that you can influence it in some way, and that might be helpful to you, particularly for your motivation. If you feel like, okay, well, I can't directly influence the result, but maybe I could influence it in some way by doing something or by saying something or by watching something. So again, those are some of the things that have come up from athletes that I've been speaking to during this time, and I would like you to put in what's in your circle of influence. What things do you think you are able to have influence over and maybe might help you bring a bit more of a sense of control? Now, it doesn't really matter what circle you begin with in this activity, because actually they all can kind of relate to each other within each circle. But what I'm hoping it can help you to do is then really focus in and really hone in on the circle of control. Remember, bringing a sense of control will give an influence over your motivation to do things. It's a key ingredient, so it's something that you want to fuel. So if you've noticed that you've been spending time and energy on things away from your control, maybe now is a time, by looking at that circle, again, printing it out, have a visual reminder, have it up, to try and help yourself in terms of your motivation. What can I actually do now? What can I do today? What could I actually do in the next 10 minutes that might help me? One way or example that I can give of something that I've talked about with motivation is giving yourself a scale of 1 to 10. So 10 out of 10 being I'm at my most motivated, and 0 out of 10 being I am not motivated at all. And it may be that you wake up one day and you're sitting there at 2 out of 10, let's say. Trying to bring a sense of control and knowing that maybe you want to go and be active and do something, but you're feeling like a 2 out of 10 and you just can't be bothered. A good question to ask yourself is, if I was to just shift from a 2 out of 10 to maybe a 2.5 out of 10, or maybe to a 3 out of 10, what could I do to make that happen? or what shift could I make? And it might be something really small, like getting up and going making a cup of tea, but what might help me feel a bit better, and what might help me fuel my motivation a bit more to give me a sense of control over it. So you're not going straight, oh, I want to go for a 10 out of 10. You're just saying, let's just make a small shift, and what could that shift be, and how might that help me? I found that's quite useful to me during this time, because you do have days where you're not motivated, but you know that you might feel better if you go for a walk or do something different like that. So scale of 1 to 10 is another activity that you could potentially do on top of this one. So just to conclude the kind of circle of concern, circle of influence and control activity, the final slide just shows that arrow pointing at the circle of control. So hopefully going through these activities, you're becoming an observer of your motivation. You're becoming interested and curious about what it is that really motivates you. By focusing in on that circle of control, I'm hoping that rather than just being an observer of your motivation, that actually you'll have more direct intent. So these are the things I can control. These are the things that are going to be helpful towards my motivation. If I check in with those regularly, and if I look at those regularly and try to maybe shift my number further up my scale of 1 to 10, that might help fuel my motivation and help fuel my sense of control. So good luck with that. That's the second key ingredient, and I'm now going to move on to the third key ingredient, which is connectedness. So connectedness is our third key ingredient, our third ingredient to really focus on and look at and think, is it working for me at the moment? So I've got a little bit of information here and a few ideas about what you can do with this ingredient, connectedness, the third C. So generally speaking, our social networks tend to be kind of organised in layers. I want you to think about your layers of motivation now and where people are in your network, and think about the ones that give you the greatest level of support. Are you being connected with them at the moment? Are you tapping into that resource that you have that can help support you? And I'd say it's exactly the same when it comes to motivation. It may be that you have somebody in your kind of sporting network who is a really good motivator for you, somebody who you could become your motivation buddy, so that maybe when you're thinking, oh, I don't want to go out and run today, you just need a text from this person and they will help you and support you and give you that kind of extra drive that you need. So remember that connectedness is feeling part of something, feeling part of a bigger picture, feeling like you're part of a team and a group and a sense of community and a sense of belonging. Now, I know that lots of clubs, etc., have been having, Zoom sessions and calls and conversations, and I think clubs have worked extremely hard to kind of keep that connectedness going. I think it's particularly hard for people at the moment when people are working from home and they're on Zoom all day long to then go and socialise on Zoom again in the evenings, and that's something I guess for people to think about and make choices over. But being able to maintain the social connections as much as you can will have a benefit to your psychological health and well-being. So connectedness, third key ingredient. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which is called identity mapping. Now, this is a way for you to really think about your social networks, and it's actually quite a fun activity to do and actually see it laid out on a piece of paper. So again, if you've got some paper, if you've got a pen, have a go at doing this. Press pause, stop, have a go at creating what's called your own identity mapping. So this is where you're kind of creating your own individual map that shows your group memberships. So start off with circle with you in the middle, and then branch out into a kind of mind map of, well, where are my connections? So, yes, it can be friends near where you live, friends from university, family far away, family abroad, clubs, memberships, societies, groups that you are members of. I want you to put any kind of group that you feel that you have a connection to. I want you to create a mind map and name those people, put them in, of all those people where you feel that you have that sense of belonging to. Once you've done that and you've created that map, I'd now like you to kind of reflect on each of those groups by considering what's my current contact like with them? And you'll probably find there's a mixture, right? You connect with some and you haven't maybe connected with others. If you haven't connected with others, maybe this is a time for you to think, might this be a good connection to make during this time, and I just haven't done that. Maybe I could send a message, pick up the phone, or whatever that might be. Also reflect on sort of the level and type of support that you give, but also what you receive from these groups. Because when we're talking about motivation for here, and for lots of people, other people can be great sources of motivation. Other groups, communities can be a great source of motivation. As I said, it may just be a text from one person that gives you that motivation to go and do something that you're wanting to do. So this really is an activity to really get a sense of those groups, how you're connected to them, what you give them, but also what they give you. Have a go at doing it. As I said, when I've done this activity, it really gets you thinking. It really gets you thinking about those groups and those and the people within those groups. So good luck, have a go, and have a look at what you end up with. And again, you can print it off, put it up, remind yourself of those connections. Now I wanted to show you the next slide, which is called the compass model, because I just thought it was interesting, as we're talking about connectedness, for you to think about those relationships that you have with people. Now, yes, it may be relationships with a coach or members of your sort of sporting community, but it also may be members at work, groups of people at work, senior leaders, your team. These are 7 strategies to maintain successful kind of professional communication between athletes and coaches, but also I think it can be used in the wider network of work as well. So just have a look at those 7 things and think, am I having an influence there? Am I using those things? Am I tapping into them to try and create the most successful feeling of connectedness that I can at the moment? Remember, this is a key ingredient for motivation. So are there ways that I could improve at this? Are there ways that I could change the way that I've been doing things so that I can have more influence and maybe fuel that area to help me increase my motivation more? Now I've finished talking to you about the 3 C's of motivation. What I hope that will give you is a sense of having more influence over your motivation, a sense of more ownership. Is okay, I know that these 3 things, if they're working for me, will mean that I am a more motivated person. The quality of my motivation will be higher. So therefore, if I learn about those 3 things, I can recognise maybe if I'm dipped in some areas and what I can then do to boost it. So I want to move on now to using strengths to maintain your motivation. I talk to athletes a lot about having a strengths-based approach. One of the first questions I ask when I meet an athlete is say, what are you good at in your sport? Where are your strengths? Where do they lie? And the typical response that I get from people is, well, I'm good at this and I'm good at that. Oh, but actually I wasn't able to do that last week. And they very quickly go into what they're not so good at. And we're kind of experts at that. We're experts in what we're not good at, but we forget what we are good at. And actually, research suggests that our natural abilities and our natural strengths quite often throughout life remain untapped. And we think we have to come from improvement from a point of weakness. Whereas actually, some of the greatest opportunity for us to grow and develop is from the strength base that we already have. So if I was to give you 60 seconds on the clock and say, right, write down all of your strengths in your sport, I wonder how good you would be at doing that. I wonder how many points you could write in 60 seconds, just like that off the top of your head, of where your strengths lie. Again, that can be quite a difficult activity for people to do because they're not coming at it from where are my strengths. They're kind of like, well, what do I need to improve at all the time? So start thinking about your strengths, start knowing what they are, having clarity over what those strengths are, because you can use that as a great foundation to develop and improve, which of course feeds and fuels competence, which is a key 3C of motivation. So one of the activities that I thought I would get you to do is to think about your strengths. Now, again, just writing down your strengths is quite a big task, right? So what I've given you, and you'll see on the slide, are some pointers. some sort of headings that you could use, and you can see the amount of detail that I would like you to go into here. So what do you think your technical strengths are in your sport? What do you think your tactical strengths are? How do you know that they're strengths? Is it because you've got an evidence base normally, so maybe you've had some success as a result of that small detail or a small tactic that you used? It may be that other people have told you that you're good at that. So there's somebody else coming in that has noticed this strength in you. And what I'd like you to do is create a kind of mind map of your strengths. Now, the athletes that I have done that with, sometimes they're the most detailed. This kind of A4 piece of paper is stuffed full of strengths all the way over it. Take some time to do it. It really can be a useful activity, and really focusing in on those small details of where your strengths do lie. And again, use those strengths to fuel that competence, to help with motivation. Well, what am I already good at? What's my baseline? How can I then try and make progress on from there? So have a go at the activity. Again, I always say to people, print it out, put it up, remind yourself of it, have it as there as a visual reminder. It may just be that going and looking at that piece of paper of your strengths gives you that piece of motivation to go and do whatever it is that you want to do that day. Now, the next question is, why do you love it? Why do you love what you do? Because generally we tend to be motivated individuals when we have a passion for what we're doing. It's also a really good question to ask yourself, and I think particularly during lockdown, it's something that I've definitely talked about with athletes, and that sometimes people question. You kind of go through your routine of your life, but when you're stopped and prevented from doing it, it's a good chance for you to say, well, why am I doing it? What is it that I love? Do I actually miss it? I've had some athletes who are like, do you know what? Have I actually missed my training? Well, that tells you something. That's you learning again about yourself. So, question that I just wanted to pose in this talk is, why do you love your sport? Where does that enjoyment come from? And it may be that tapping into that on a day where you're not feeling so motivated might just give you that impetus to do what it is that you want to do, because it's like, actually, I do really genuinely enjoy doing that. The word commitment that I've put on there is another tool, I guess, that I've talked about with athletes during this time, is that being expected to be motivated the whole of the time is unrealistic. But you can still have a commitment to your sport, even if you're not doing a physical training session or, some kind of, strength and conditioning or weights. It doesn't really matter. You can still have a commitment in a different way. It might be reading an autobiography of your sporting hero. It might be watching a video of a fantastic rowing race that you remember from the past. Recognising that that's still a commitment to your sport, it's just not necessarily something physical. And I think it's a good point to make about that commitment, because that enjoyment and that commitment will affect your participation and frequency, but we cannot expect to be 100% motivated all of the time. We can't expect every single morning to jump out of bed and be like, way, today I'm 100% motivated. It's unrealistic, and actually it's probably potentially quite annoying for the people around you. Is that accept that those fluctuations will be there, but know about you and your motivation, so that when you want to tap into it, you know what you can do to help yourself. Now, what ways to help yourself? I mean, and that's obviously the key to some of these things, is knowing what things work for you. And I talked to you at the beginning about motivation being on a continuum, and I just wanted to show you this slide, which kind of shows that, and the fact that we will be moving on this continuum on a day-to-day basis. Now, the examples that I've given there are to do with rowing. But the essence of the slide is that you can see that intrinsic motivation, the love of the sport, the love and genuine enjoyment that you get from it, sits at one end of the continuum, and it moves. And as you move this way along the continuum, it becomes more extrinsic motivation. Now, more extrinsic motivation tends to be motivation that you receive from an outside source. So it might be that text that athlete gives you. It may be the t-shirt or the medal that you get at the end of the race, that it's that motivates you. And on the far end of the continuum sits amotivation, which is when you're not motivated at all. Now you can see that there's different stages of motivation. This comes from a theory called self-determination theory, and it's a very neat framework for thinking about motivation and what works for you. So it may be that yes, you are intrinsically motivated and you do have a love for your sport, but perhaps in the last 50 metres of a running race, that t-shirt and that medal is what's keeping you going and motivating you to cross the line. So you can see how we can kind of swing between the two. And you can also see in the middle there that there are areas of motivation that again you might want to tap into at this moment, that sense of identity that you know, I'm a rower, it's part of who I am. So if that's something that really speaks to you and resonates with you, maybe it might be a moment to kind of tap into that identity at the moment. I row because I know it's good for me, the kind of the health benefits that you get from sport. Maybe in lockdown, being sedentary at your desk, you're tapping into that kind of motivation because it's like, well, I want to try and keep fit during this time. It's okay to be intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. There's not one that's better than another. We use different motivations for different things. Over the long term in terms of years, it is better to have a sense of intrinsic motivation and a genuine love of what you do rather than always being motivated by external sources. But I think for most people, you recognise that you can be in different places at different times on that continuum. So I just thought that was a useful thing to just talk about in terms of being realistic about motivation, and maybe there are certain places along that line that might resonate with you now that you think, oh, actually, maybe I could try and fuel that a bit more, and that might help me. So I'm kind of coming to the end of my talk now, and I just thought I'd put a slide up there with a few ideas for you about trying to help maintain motivation. We can't just snap our fingers and it happens. As I hope I've given you some ideas of things that you can work on, but again, learning about you and knowing about you is the first step, and I hope that this talk has given you ideas to generate some ideas for you. But here are some up there, and I'm not going to read them all out to you, but have a look. Some of the things that the activities that I've done are captured in there, but I think, you know, having fun and tapping into your intrinsic motivation, the love for the sport that you're doing, is a great way to start. It's a great thing to remind yourself of when you're having harder and difficult days. So finally, I just want to, in the final slide, just summarise what I've been saying about motivation. Those three C's, competence, control, connectedness. Hopefully you'll remember them. Hopefully on days where you're not feeling so motivated, you'll look at them and you'll say, okay, is one of them not working for me today? What can I try and do? What's in my control? How can I try and fuel that to help give me the impetus to do what it is that I want to do? Recognise it has been a very difficult period for everybody. It continues to be at the moment. We're not out of the woods yet. So I hope that all of you have found this talk interesting. I hope that you've found it engaging in terms of the activities that I have given you, and mainly a sense of your motivation, where your starting point is, where maybe you could make some improvements, where maybe you could make some changes. Good luck with it. I hope that you enjoy doing the activities. The final slide is just showing my details. Please give me a follow on social media. I quite often put up things to do with sports psychology. I hope my enthusiasm for the topic has come across today. It's a fascinating area. It's a really good time at the moment to reflect on your sport and what you do and your training. So I hope some of the things that I've given you today will be useful. Thanks very much for listening. Good luck with your motivation. Good luck with using the 3 C's in the future. And all the very best to you and your families. Stay safe and keep well. Goodbye.